In this video, we look at Bede's translation of the Gospel of John into his dialect of Old English. His version was then, at a later date, translated into the West Saxon dialect, well over about 200 years or so later. We will compare the syntax of this West Saxon version with the syntax of modern German and modern Swedish. Now, the translation used in this video can be found at this link here, which will be included in the description. So let's get started. All right, just a bit of revision first, just going over material briefly from previous videos. So an independent clause or main clause can stand as a sentence on its own. An independent clause in Old English has the conjugated verb in the second place. All Germanic languages are verb second, so verb in the second place. Subsequent verbs will go to the end. That's in an independent or main clause, so we'd have subject, the conjugated verb, and then we can have object, time, manner, place, reason, and these can be moved about. If we wish to emphasize one particular element, for instance, we want to emphasize the manner in which something occurs, the manner, then we can place the manner out front, which then means the subject is shifted to third place in order to keep the verb in second place. And then all the other so on, object, time, place, reason. Okay, any one of those can be brought out front. We can take place, put that out front, and then the same thing again. The reason can go out front, the object can go out front, or just simply we can also rearrange the order within here. We could go time, manner, place, object, reason. So there's quite a bit of flexibility here. What's key though is the conjugated verb in the second place. Other things around it. All right, now two or more verbs are present. They go to the end of the sentence in their infinitive form. So we'd have subject, conjugated verb, then we have time, indirect object, object. The order of those can change as can anything else that might be in there as well. The second verb then goes to the very end in its infinitive form. If there was a third verb, that would then go to the second last place, building inwards if you like. That would also be in its infinitive form. Unless we're talking about the past tense. So when speaking in the past tense, we use the following form: subject, verb, object, and then we use not the infinitive form for the second verb. Here's our first conjugated verb. Our second verb then goes to the end, and it's in the past participle of the main verb. So it's in its past participle form. Okay, whereas up here, if we were just talking about the present tense, we'd have the second verb would be in its infinitive form, its unconjugated form. Whereas here, it's in its past participle form. Okay, so an example is I have read the book. Have is our first verb in Old English, habe, conjugated. First person present tense, singular, habe. Read then goes to the end in its past participle form, either raden or raden. So ich habe das Buch gelesen. All right. I have read the book. Okay, I is the subject, the book is the object. Hence, for the accusative, for the word the, becomes the definite article, becomes tha. Okay, singular. Tha, accusative, singular. We could also have gone object first, so we could put the tha book, habe ich gelesen. Okay, same thing, but simply placing the object first. All right, so. But what's important is that the first verb is conjugated and it's in the second position. Any other verbs then go to the end. Next bit. When asking questions, we have the following form. The verb goes to the front. This will also happen for commands and directives and so on, but for the moment, let's just deal with questions. When we're asking a closed question, then we would have the conjugated verb first. Should I bring my tools with me tomorrow? Shall ich on morgen min tol mit me bringen? Okay, morgen or mergen. Okay, so should I in the morning my tools with me to bring? Notice here, should is the first verb. It's conjugated. It goes to the very beginning of the sentence. Just like today in modern English, we asking a closed question like that. Again, verb goes right up the front. Should, right up the front. Okay, so shall ich on morgen min tal mit me bringen? Okay, notice the second verb here went to the end in its infinitive form. Now, for open-ended questions where we want something more than a yes or no answer, we can start with an interrogative. Hawar beyita each helper. Where can I get help? Okay, so I, the subject, the conjugated verb to get, beyita, and the interrogative or interrogative, hawar, where to get I help. Okay, next bit. Conjunctions. Now, let's deal first with the coordinating conjunctions. Ones like and, but, or, okay, simple ones like that, yet, and so on. So, John and I will come with you. Well, here in the very first part here, all we have is a subject in this clause here with single word. John, subject, conjunction and then subject. Normal word order holds in with coordinating conjunctions. The word order doesn't change. So if this were a clause over here on the left, it would have the same word order: subject, verb, object, and so on. Okay, any second verbs would go to the end again. All right, so that's with coordinating conjunctions. So John and ich wolle mit Theo eu kommen. They as in singular you, or eu as in plural you. So conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions, and but, ak, or, author. You need to see the videos and all that, but they don't change word order. Okay, now we're going to come down and have a look in this example here. Now, all of this has been a subject of previous videos in the playlist. I'm simply just revising. It's a brief revision at that. So let's have a look here where we have a subordinating conjunction. And now word order in subordinating conjunctions will change. What we're going to see is in a subordinating conjunction, all the verbs go to the end. There's no conjugated verb up here in the second place. All the verbs go to the end. The first verb in its conjugated form goes to the very end. If there's a second verb in the clause, that will go to the second last position in its infinitive form. So if we have a look at this sentence here, he did it on the same day that they intended to bear him to the funeral pile. That will be a subordinating conjunction. So the main clause or the independent clause has a normal word order: subject, verb, object, indirect object, and so on. So he doede hit thu ilkandaya, the he hinne totham ada bearen walden. So now the subordinating conjunction means that the dependent clause or the secondary clause has all its verbs shifted to the end. Okay, he did it on the same day that or on which they him to the funeral pyre to bear intended. All right, so all of this subject, these examples I'm using here have been shown in previous videos, so please go have a look at those. And now for commands and directives, we use the imperative form for the main verb involved. So the imperative form, for instance, we're ordering someone to go, is simply ga. Okay, firmly stated, ga. This one, be quiet, be calm, beil ro. And now a statement, a statement or a saying. Now the day or time has come. Nu beil sedai yakumen, or nu beil tid yakumen. Say tid, sorry, yakumen. All right, so you get the idea. Okay, now let's get more towards the subject of this video, and that will be, let me just finish here with this thing. For statements, we place the conjugated verb in first place, followed by the subject, and then the rest, and so on. You just saw that on the previous page. Now, the point of this video is the Gospel of St. John in West Saxon, edited by James Wilson Bright. This book written in the late 19th century when research into Old English was at its height. I've taken, here's a screenshot here from chapter 1 of the book of John, the Gospel of John. And I just want to look at the first 8 sentences, but 8 verses, sorry. I'm actually going to do 9. I added one in as I was making it, so there's actually going to be 9 here. So I haven't shown the 9th, but you'll see it later on. Now this is Bede's translation of the Gospel of John, written no later than 735, and then rewritten or translated into the West Saxon dialect around 250 years later. And this is the link here, which I'll include in the description below the video. Now, Bede was an Anglo and not a Saxon. Okay, distinction there. They're not the same thing. He was an Anglo and not a Saxon. And so it was necessary, like 250 years later, the West Saxons had to translate from the Anglo dialect. Now, they're very similar, mutually intelligible, but not the same, not identically the same. Okay, verse 1. On verruimte was word, and that word was mid God, and God was that word. Okay, so familiar passage, perhaps anyone who's read the Bible or familiar with the Bible at all. You might say, in the beginning was the Word, and that Word was with God, and God was that Word. Now this is just paraphrasing Genesis 1, the very beginning of the Bible. So this is John's Gospel, just rephrasing that. But to say in the beginning, on the verruimte was word, and that word was mit God, and God was that word. Okay, now notice that is the same in both its nominative and accusative forms. They are identical, the two forms, nominative and accusative. And the word word, which is the same as the modern word word, it's the same both in its nominative and accusative singular and plural forms, are the same for this neuter noun. Okay, now that's verse 1. Notice here we have an adverbial element at the beginning, which is the time element, because it's very important here in Genesis 1 and in John here to emphasize in the beginning. And so it appears before the verb and it pushes the subject to third place. The word is the subject. But what's most important is to emphasize the fact that it was in the beginning. And that is why we don't have subject at the first, in the first place, and then verb in the second, and then the time element. The writer here, both in Genesis and in John here, wants to emphasize the fact that in the beginning, very important factor to draw to the readers or the listener's attention. So hence the time element appears in the front. Okay, then verb, conjugated verb. And then what we have here, this is first and third person singular, the verb, present tense. Sorry, my apologies. It is the past tense, was. Was is the same as the modern was. Sorry, my apologies, it's past tense. Conjunction and then the subject here, the second clause. Now, this second clause, this is a subordinating conjunction, so the word order in the second clause isn't going to be any different to the first one. It's just that we're not emphasizing some other factors. So subject will appear, then the conjugated verb, then in this case indirect object. The preparation mid takes a dative object, and hence we know this is the indirect object. We have another conjunction attaching a third clause, again subject verb object. Okay. Next bit. Second verse, that was on verrumen mit God. That was in the beginning with God. Okay, subject, conjugated verb, then object, indirect object. On verrumen is, if you check in the dictionary, verrumen is the accusative form. And so on in the beginning, on here taking an accusative object. So in the beginning, okay, is what's meant here. Now, third verse, Ela thin gwaran yawarchta thurch huna, and nan thin ganas yawarcht butan him. So all things were made through him. sturch huna him. And then we have a conjunctions, coordinating conjunction, and so we know word order will not change. We're going to have subject, verb, object, whatever. Nan thing, nas, not was, not were, yawarcht, butan him. Now, a funny thing happening here, because yawarcht and yawarcht are verbs. So why are they marked here as object and indirect object? Clearly, they're verbs. Later in the video, I'm going to show you a different interpretation, but what I'm arguing here is that these are not, while they are verbs, they're actually being used as nouns. And here, so it's functioning as a noun. So what the author's trying to show is that, yes, God creates in the sense of a verb, but God is also creator in the sense of noun. So yes, God makes things, creates things, does things, okay? That is the verb part. But God is also the source of creation, the motive force, the creation itself. And so it is a property of God. And so what's happening here is that these, what appear to be verbs, are actually being used as nouns. And the clue there is that if you have a look here, this has got an E on the end, and this hasn't. This is looking like it's taking the dative form, hence the indirect object. A dative noun would have the E form on the end, the E on the end, and here no E on the end, suggestive of the accusative form. So the two hints there, plus if you have a little bit of knowledge of the Bible, God is both creator in the sense of doer of things, maker of things in the verb sense, but the property of creation is that of God. God himself is creator, and so that is a noun, a property of God, and so it is the nature or property of God, and so it is a noun. And so these verbs are being cleverly used as nouns. I believe that's what's being applied here. Let's move on. Now, that was leaf there on him yawarcht was, and that leaf was mana leocht. Okay, so that, what is that? Well, that is referring to the word that, referring back to the antecedent, the prior subject in the previous verse, the word. So the word was life, which in him made was, and that life was the light of humanity. Yeah, okay. So what we have here is subject, conjugated verb, object. Then we have a subordinating conjunction, which tells us the word order is going to change. And in that subordinating conjunction, we then have the verb must go to the very end. The subject is not after the conjunction there, which the subject doesn't explicitly appear because it doesn't need to, because it refers back to the subject here. Okay, it refers back to its antecedent. The only subject in this whole sentence is the word. Okay, is the word. So this sentence, that was leaf there on him yawarcht was, colon, meaning period end. Okay, there's your sentence there. Okay, made up of these two clauses held together by a subordinating conjunction. And so the subject doesn't again need to explicitly reappear. It's contained back here. It's referred to. It's the antecedent is back here. And so what we have here is an object and indirect object and the conjugated verb at the end. Now we have another conjunction. We're starting a new sentence here, but it's adding on, the conjunction is combining something of equal grammatical weight with what's gone before. And that life was mana leocht, and that life was the light of humanity. Okay, and so we're back here now to subject, verb, object, normal word order. Remember, in main clauses, we have normal word order, subject, verb, object, indirect object. Okay, when we have a subordinating conjunction, all the verbs must go to the end. Okay, now verse 5. And that leich lucht an thustorum, and thustora that ne yenamon. Okay, and that light illuminates in the darkness, and the darkness thence cannot overcome it. Okay, now the conjunction here is a coordinating conjunction, and then surprisingly here, the verb has been thrown to the end. Now, the subject, the darkness, this is in the nominative here, then that is the object, and Yanamon. Now, I do wonder if perhaps it simply should be that Yanamon, thence modifies the verb, but it looks like an object. So this clause here is behaving like it's a subordinate clause because, or secondary clause, or dependent clause because a verb has been thrown to the end. An odd thing, but we'll see another interpretation of that later on. Okay, number 6. Man was faram Gode ascend, thus nama was Iohannes. Now, a man was from God sent, of the name was of John. Okay, so we have subject, verb, indirect object, present participle and main verb because we're talking now past tense. Okay, we're talking about the past, so we use past participle instead of the infinitive here to talk in terms of the past tense. And then we go thasnama, of the name. I put it under subject, but it's the genitive here, of the name. It's referring back to the man here. Was, and then subject again. Okay. I think that's all right there. All right, next bit. Verse 7. Thais kom to your witnesser, that he your witnesser kude betham lechte, that ele men thurach huna yeluvdon. He came as a witness so that he, a witness of the knowledge about the light, in order that all people through him may believe or believed. Okay, this is past tense here, so interpreted best as believed, so that all people through him believed. Okay, now, if we notice here, we have subject, conjugated verb. This is the main clause, the independent clause. We then have a subordinating conjunction, that, so that subject, object, indirect object goes next, and if there was a verb, then that would go to the end. Now notice here, is this kuth there, or is it kuth there? Now kuth there is a verb, to tell, to explain, to make known, and that verb there should really be at the end of the clause, because this is a subordinating clause. That is a subordinating conjunction. So that should throw kuda to the end there. What I suspect is that there's a noun which looks very similar, kuth there, and that F symbol there may have been a misprint, and D was put in the place. Now, as it's printed, it has D in there, which makes it kuth there. Okay, so I've got a feeling that's actually a noun, witness of the knowledge, and so that's why it comes under object. And then about the light, tham is dative, and be takes a dative object, so leochte is in the dative, so that all makes sense. That's all indirect object. That looks like what was intended is not kuth there, but kuthe. Your witness kuthe, okay, which is the object. Now I could be wrong about that, and later on there's another interpretation I'll show you. Okay, next conjunction is again a subordinating conjunction again, which is going to throw the verb to the very end, which is exactly what we find as we would expect. So subject, object, and conjugated verb at the very end. So for a subordinate or secondary clause or dependent clause, verbs get thrown to the end when a subordinating conjunction is used. Okay, Thais kom to your witnesser, that he your witnesser kuzde, betham lechte, that el men thurch, hune yeluvdon. Now again, that could be not kuzde, but kuthe. Okay, so I'm claiming it's a mistake, an error, but there is also another interpretation, as I'll show you later. Okay, so the text says kuther, which appears to be incorrect, as it seems more likely that now kuther was intended because it better agrees with biblical translations. A witness of the knowledge. Kuther is the knowledge. Your witnesser is a witness of. Okay, thais is the masculine definite article. Hence, we know that that is he. It's referring to he. Thais. Okay, next bit. Number 8, verse 8. Nas he leocht ac that he a witnesser farth bare betham leochte. Not was he the light, but that he is with knowledge that is productive concerning the light. Okay. All right, so what we have here is a statement, which is why it begins with a verb. It's a clear statement. He was not the light. The author could not be clearer about that. Is put in that statement, directive, command-like form, verb first. Nas, not was. He leocht. Ak. This is a coordinating conjunction, so the word order in the following clause doesn't need to change. Subject, verb, object, and so on. Ak that he, your witnesser, farth bare. Betham leochte, sorry. All right, so that's what's happening there. Now for some counterexamples which are a different word order. Verse 9. Okay, here we go. Soth leocht was that on lucht alchne kommende, man on thisna midden erd. Okay, now the G is deliberately, it's not in the translation. I haven't missed it out. It is in this version here of Bede's text. There is no G with a dot above it. So it is, but notice this funny object here. Kommend without the N is the present participle of the verb, meaning coming. But it's actually been put in with an N there, which is odd because it gives an appearance of an accusative noun. So hang on, but let's have a look at what's going on. So it says here, Sothlecht was that on lucht alchne kommende man on thisne midden erd. Okay, so the true light was what gives light to every coming of a person into this world. Man means person. It doesn't mean male person. It means general person, male and female. Okay, this verse clearly doesn't follow the West Saxon word order, which parallels that of modern German. We should expect to find the verbs in a subordinate clause at the end of that clause, but that has not happened. Okay, we would expect, if this is a verb, kommende, meaning coming, then surely this should be at the end of the subordinate clause. And so should the first verb here, but they're not. Okay, that's not happened at all. Okay, but it does match that of modern Swedish where the verbs in a subordinate clause occur before the end. So I want to have a look at that now. Sothlecht was on lucht alkne kommende man on thisne midden erd. Now modern Swedish, a subordinate clause is the following form. It has a conjunction, then a subject, a clausal adverb or negation, finite verb conjugated, non-finite verb in infinitive or past participle, depending on whether it's present or past tense you're talking about, then objects, spatial adverb, temporal adverb, so space, time, manner, and so on. Place, time, manner. Now, applied to our verse above, we have the conjunction, that, finite verb conjugated, okay, because there's no clausal adverb or negation or subject there. On lucht is the finite verb conjugated, and then we have the non-finite verb in infinitive or past participle. Now, this one, if there were no N there, it would be the usual form that our dictionaries give us for the word coming, meaning for present participle, kommende, with no N, okay? putting the N there suspiciously makes it look like an accusative noun is intended. A verb has been turned into a noun. Again, coming in the sense of a noun and not an action. All right, it's a property. The coming into this world. Again, this act of creation by God, labeling it a noun and not a verb. Okay, even though it's both. And that seems to be biblically correct. So this could well be intended as an accusative noun. But let's say we take it as a verb, then this Swedish word order applied here to subordinate clauses fits. That onlucht auch ne kommen ne man on thisna midden So we have an object, the man, person, and we have spatial adverb that's coming into this world. All right, let's look at some more examples. Let's try another verse from Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. Now this verb, where did I get this on? I think this was chapter 14 of Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. I think it was chapter 14, and it talks about the coming of Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons. And of course, Pope Gregory sent a delegation under St. Augustus to the Anglo-Saxons, and the first Anglo-Saxon they made contact with, was the King of Kent, and he was the first to be converted amongst the Anglo-Saxons to the Christian faith. So we have Thar was on Thartid Athelburgt Kuning Harten on Kenterike and Michti. Now, an independent or main clause in modern Swedish has the form subject or adverbial element, then finite verb, subject if not at beginning. So if the subject is not here at the beginning, there's an adverbial element instead, then the subject will be here. Okay. Then a clausal adverb or negation, and then a non-finite verb in infinitive or past participle form, depending. If it's in the infinitive, then it's present tense. If it's in the past participle, then it's past tense. Then we have objects, manner, spatial, temporal. Okay. Okay, so in our example, it fits nicely. We have thar, subject, or adverbial element. So in this case, thar is then, the adverbial element then. It has a sense of time, so it's an adverbial element. Finite verb, was. Subject, if not at the beginning, well, tid is our subject. It's the time that's in the nominative. So on thartid, in that time. Okay. And this is the thar, the nominative and accusative plural for the definite article is thar, both nominative and accusative. Whereas in the single case, thar is would be inappropriate here. But this is a time, this is an interval of time here, in that period of time. So it's, in a sense, plural. So on thartid, it's not talking singular here. It's talking plural, in that interval of time. In that time, King Athelbert called in Kent. Now, notice here the clausal adverb negation. Well, the clausal adverb here that modifies everything is Athelburg König, because it modifies the whole sentence. Without it, we'd have then was in that time called in Kent, which wouldn't make much sense. So we have this clausal adverb here which modifies the entire sentence, okay, by naming this individual. And then Harten is the past participle, named, called, named. This is the past participle of harta, to name, hartan, sorry, to name. So this is a past participle, and here we have a spatial adverb because it's location, in Kent. Okay, now notice how this sentence here, which doesn't fit the usual West Saxon word order, in the sense that this verb here should be at the end, but it's not. It's come near the end, just before. But if you look at the Swedish sentence structure, it seems, modern Swedish sentence structure, it seems to fit. Okay. And modern German, we'd have harten at the end. Ha-ten at the end. And we'd expect the same with the West Saxon word order too, at the end. But instead it comes just before the end. And that fits with the modern Swedish structure. Let's take another look at verse 3 again. Ela thin gwaran yawarch te thurach huna ananthin nas yawarch butan him. Now, if we have a look here, we have the subject or adverbial element, all things. Okay, subject. Waren were. This slot is empty because we already have the subject up here. Clausal adverb negation not necessary. Non-finite verb in infinitive or past participle. Now, yawarchte and yawarcht are actually the past participles. They are the past participles of the verb yawarcht. Of the verb, the infinitive form of the verb is yawurchan or yawurkan, depending on however you want to look at it. Most dictionaries seem to have it as yawurchan. So this is the past participle of yawurchan. Yawurchan is the infinitive form of made, make, create. Okay, and yawarchte is the past participle of that verb to make. Okay, so that fits there exactly. And then thurachuna, objects, that's through him, the object. Okay, and then let's go on to the second sentence here. And nanthing. So here's our conjunction. The subject or adverbial element, nanthing, no things. Nas, not were, finite verb. Same thing here. The subject's already been covered over here. No clausal adverb or negation here necessary. A non-finite or infinitive or past participle. In this case, we have the past participle. Okay, this is the sentence structure for modern Swedish for the independent clause, for the primary or main clause. Then we have objects, butan him, without him. Okay, that's that. So treating yawarcht as verbs, the syntax fits with the modern Swedish word order and not with the modern German word order, which would agree with the West Saxon. All right, so then again, look at the following passage, which closely parallels modern German word order. Now, I picked this one up from Bosworth Toller. I just came across it by accident, was looking around for stuff, and I thought, what a wonderful example here. Okay. Hul that was wellende sapelbodde say there thona halland on thusna middenier kummende yosegen walde. Look at that. 3 verbs right at the end. Okay. How he was a fiery prophet who would tell of the coming of the Saviour into this world. Say there being who, the relative pronoun. Okay. Now note that the present participle of kummen is kummende, but that is not what we have in this passage, where the verb appears to be rendered in an accusative form, kummene. If you look up here, kummene, it's suggestive of something that appears to be accusative. It may be intended to function as a noun and not as a verb, because if it is a verb, then the rules of syntax require that the third last position should have a verb in its infinitive form, either yekummen or kummen. But we don't have that. What we have here is the present participle. So maybe it's intended as a noun object, accusative noun. But either way, we have the conjugated verb would. See in the second subclause here, say there is who, von a Haaland, okay, the Saviour, who would. So what we'd do if we were to translate who would tell of the coming of the Saviour into this world, we would have who, say there, after the comma. Our first verb here, we know because this is a subordinate clause, it must go to the end in its conjugated form. So present tense, first person singular, second person singular, sorry, goes here, walde, okay, and then tell of. Okay, tell of is our second verb, and that would then go into the second last place in its infinitive form, which sure enough, there it is, usegen. Okay, the coming there looks like it's been attempted to be here the coming, that's a verb too, in its present tense form. It appears to have been put in here in the third last place, but instead of being it's an infinitive form, kommen or gekommen, it's in this present participle. Okay, so so it very closely agrees with modern German word order, with the West Saxon word order. So, okay, seems to be following rules. All the verbs push to the end in this subordinate clause after the comma there. Okay, what else do I have? Okay, so it raises a number of questions. In Old English, the second verb if you have a second verb in an independent clause, it can appear at the end. You would expect that under the West Saxon system, or it can appear near to the end, and there's reasons I've shown that you've got two choices here. You can use this modern German word order, which pushes the verb to the very end, or you can use the modern Swedish word order, which has the verb near the end. Okay, and you'll see in Old English text, you're going to be seeing the second verb in a clause, the first verb being in the second place at the front. Okay, and then the second, third verbs all going to the end. Well, they can go to the very end or near to the very end. And I've just outlined two possibilities there. And it seems to run through all the text that you can read. You can read a text and you'll have both examples within the same text. Now, is this a difference between the Saxon and Anglo dialects? I don't know. I've got that question running through my head. I don't know. Does the word order or syntax of Old English lie somewhere between modern German and modern Swedish, or is it both? Or are we seeing both forms because we are seeing the documented records of two separate dialects? Are they switching between the two? I find that a little hard to believe that would be the case. Could it just be that late West Saxon word order had undergone some changes relative to its earlier version? Maybe the later we go, the more the verb slips inwards from the end, as we certainly have in modern English. It seems like all the verbs tend to congregate towards the beginning, just after the subject. We still have the first verb in the second place, but then following verbs may come immediately after it and quite far from the end. So maybe that's just a change as Old English has progressed to Middle and then Modern English. Could we just be seeing the influence of Latin syntax on Old English, maybe? Maybe that's pushing the change and pushing the verbs away from the end. I understand, from what I understand, Latin has a much freer word order and things can appear pretty well anywhere. I don't know, to be sure. I'm not a linguist. They're just things I've noticed, and really these questions here sort of push the matter. We really want to know how to form sentences in Old English, how to speak in Old English is really what we want to achieve. These questions are really for linguists, I think. But nonetheless, they do crop up and they're interesting in their own right. Okay, I think that is it then.